Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the first town hall about hoarding disorder, and I'd like to thank the IOCDF, International OCD Foundation, for hosting today. My name is Lee Shuer. This is Becca Belofsky. We've got Dr. Randy Frost and Dr. Robin Zasio. We're all going to be here to sort of share our perspectives and backgrounds on what it's like to be living with hoarding disorder in the time of COVID-19. It's a timely topic. I know that a lot of us are sort of in this together, but also maybe feeling a little bit alone. So we wanted to give this opportunity to all of you out there around the world, a chance to kind of maybe share what's on your mind. Let us know what you're thinking, so that we can all feel that much more connected. Because if you think about it, if it's on your mind, it's probably on a lot of other people's minds too. So today's a great chance to ask some questions and to talk to a pretty diverse panel here. I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to give a more extended introduction to themselves. You've got just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping here. Now, you've all got the chat box on the right. What we want to do, because this is a sensitive topic and because people are really being brave coming out and sharing personally, we want to keep it respectful. We want to keep it civil. We want to keep it safe. So that's what we're asking of you today. And so as we go through over the next hour and a half, if something's on your mind, let us know. And we'll do our best to get to every question possible. This is being recorded, so you will be able to view it later on or share it with your friends and colleagues. It'll be posted on YouTube as well as Facebook, and you can get all the links to this and other town halls that have explored challenges like OCD, and we'll also look at other related disorders in the future. So without further ado, I will be introducing our guest, Dr. Randy Frost. And so Dr. Randy Frost is the Harold and Epsa Sipila Israel Professor of Psychology at Smith College. He has published more than 180 scientific articles and book chapters. His books on hoarding include Buried in Treasures, Help for Compulsive Acquiring, Saving, and Hoarding, and Compulsive Hoarding and Acquiring Therapist Guide, and the Client Workbook. His book Stuff, Compulsive Hoarding and the Meaning of Things, was a New York Times bestseller, finalist for the 2010 Books for a Better Life Award, and named a must-read book for 2011 by the Massachusetts Book Awards. He's also authored the Oxford Handbook on Hoarding and Acquiring. He has been funded by the International IOCDF Foundation, the OCD Foundation, and NIMH. In 2012, he was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award. I think that was a little early because you got work to do. You still got work by the Mental Health Association of San Francisco. And in 2013, a Career Achievement Award from the International OCD Foundation. He's lectured and conducted workshops on hoarding throughout the world. That might be the understatement of the day. Randy, I'd like to give you an opportunity to share a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you to IOCDF for the opportunity to be on this town hall webcast. I've been doing research on hoarding and related topics for about 30 years, and it's really been quite an exciting time in this area, because 30 years ago we knew absolutely nothing about this disorder, and now there are literally hundreds and hundreds of researchers around the world looking at this. A number of different research laboratories doing really high quality research on this disorder, and a variety of very talented people, those of you on the panel today among them, who are really involved in trying to help us understand what this is all about, and even more than that, to give us a sense of what possessions mean to people in general, because that's really where we start understanding what's going on with hoarding disorder. Is for all of us, possessions have a magical quality, but in order for us to understand that first, we can then move forward to figure out, well, what goes wrong with that, and where does the trouble with managing these possessions or managing these attachments that we have to possessions come about. And that's really the thing that's interested me most in the last 30 years with respect to hoarding and hoarding disorder. And I think this particular time is one that's quite unusual for all of us, very stressful for all of us to be living in the time of COVID-19. And especially for people with hoarding disorder, this time limits our ability to connect with other people. And we know one of the things that's very helpful to people with hoarding disorders, be able to connect with other people through the workshops, the Buried Treasures workshops, through group treatments, and a variety of other contexts where people are able to explore this. It also offers some challenges for people, especially with hoarding disorder, for whom acquiring things is a major part of their life and a major source of enjoyment for them. And so there's always the temptation to turn to internet shopping at this time. And so that will be really interesting to see how that plays out with respect to COVID-19. But I'll leave it there, and looking forward to an interesting discussion today with a lot of interesting questions.
Great, thanks, Randy. You know, one of the really important questions that we all hear a lot is, what is the difference between hoarding disorder and collecting? And I wonder if, while you have a moment there, if you could kind of give folks a background, just the sort of the DSM definition of what is hoarding disorder, so that we're all sort of starting from the same place. Because then as we explore what's the difference between that and collecting, I think we'll have a better sense.
Yeah, now in terms of DSM, the fundamental criteria for hoarding disorder is a difficulty discarding or letting go. That is not just throwing things away, but letting go of things in any way, selling, donating, loaning out, and so forth. Difficulty letting go of possessions that causes great distress when considering the possibility of letting go with possessions. And that's sort of the fundamental behavioral or emotional backdrop for it as the major criteria. The second criteria is that this collection or this inability to let go of things results in accumulation of things that clutter the living areas of the home. It's important to note that what's really involved here is a clutter in the living areas of the home. It doesn't really matter if your garage is full, your attic's full. It's really the extent to which this interferes with your ability to live. And that's one of the criteria as well. That's got to interfere with your ability. And one of the things we know about hoarding is that most people who suffer from hoarding disorder also acquire things excessively. But acquiring is not a diagnostic criteria for hoarding, because there are people who struggle with collecting and clutter and yet don't acquire excessively. And so in the diagnostic scheme, it's considered a specifier. So you indicate, once someone has a diagnosis of hoarding disorder, you indicate whether or not they engage in excessive acquisition. So that, in a nutshell, is what we've got here.
Right, and I think it's also important to point out that, you know, since 2013, this has been viewed specifically as a distinct disorder, separate from but related to OCD.
Exactly, yes. In DSM, which is the diagnostic code used in the United States since 2013, also the World Health Organization has its own diagnostic classification, and they have also just entered hoarding disorder as one of the mental disorders in that classification. It's called the International Classification of Diseases. It's the 11th version of that document. I think that was published in 2017.
Thank you. So there's a lot of information that people are hearing right now, maybe for the first time, maybe you've heard it before. That includes a lot of language, a lot of sort of perspectives on whether these things are a part of who we are, maybe it is who we are. We're going to explore all of that today. I'm sure that a lot of you out there have questions, concerns about all of these things, not just the science, but the art, the emotional, beyond the physical. So we'll be delving below the surface as well as viewing the tip of the iceberg. I think that managing hoarding disorder might be about managing what's above the surface. However, experiencing what's below the surface, if this is something that you struggle with yourself, is no small task. So we're also going to be acknowledging that as well. Thank you. So our next featured presenter here is Becca Belofsky, and to represent folks who live with people who have clutter issues. That would be me in our case. So Becca Belofsky, And pardon me, the only time I really have a hard time is reading. So I'll struggle with that, but the rest I think will come naturally, Becca Belofsky, right here, co-founder of Mutual Support Consulting, LLC, is an international trainer, speaker, and relationship coach. She studied psychology at Smith College, and her interests lie in emotional development and social connectedness throughout the lifespan. As an outspoken peer advocate, Beck is candid about her own experiences with depression and suicidal ideation, OCD, overshopping, and grief. In addition to her work with MSC, Beck provides relationship-based therapy to children on the autism spectrum and coaching for family members. She also facilitates wellness groups and the Buried in Treasures workshop and is a certified older adult peer specialist.
Yeah, so one of my interests is social connectedness across the lifespan. And wow, we've all got to do a lot extra to feel that social connection right now. And a lot of the work that I focus on is reducing stigma around this topic so that people feel welcome to come out and get help and improve the relationships, compassion for themselves and compassion and understanding with other family members who are affected by this, because we know it doesn't happen in a silo. There are other people that are feeling the burden of having too much stuff. And I really try to bring people all together on the same page. I think compassion is really key when we're focusing on this issue. And it's really hard. Sometimes there are younger family members in homes with too much stuff. And I want to be able to help all members of a family and keep health and safety in mind too. And so a lot of times when I'm speaking, I'm talking to parents not to be in an adversarial position about getting help for their children, but being as someone who is working with them to show that we can really meet all needs in a family, even when there's too much stuff. And I think it's really important to recognize that there are ways to communicate around this issue that can improve the situation and kind of tone down the heat of the situation. Because especially when we're all packed into our homes as it is right now, there's not any kind of outlet for the tension that can be building. But I thought, and I hope today we can talk about that and brainstorm some ways around making things calmer and more caring when we have to be in such tight corners together. It's super important.
Right. Thanks. And that, this is really meaningful to me, to have you step up and come out and talk about your experience. I know that it was, really, really hard for a long time there. It's gotten better, and we'll talk about how. But, there are two things I sort of wanted to put out there. One was that, it was sort of portrayed in the media because we started to get attention when we were doing this work, and we were really a couple of the first outspoken sort of peers. There were people doing this before us, but we were really sort of spearheading and taking this on as sort of the first couple of excessive finding and keeping, if you will. And I felt like the conversation's really never going to be complete if we don't have members of families sharing their perspective as well. They're often left out. And, one of the amazing new resources that's available is an initiative that you've been a part of called MyCope. And maybe you could give a little talk about what that is, and we'll put all the links to these places in the website for you.
Yes, for the past couple of years, I've been fortunate to be part of an initiative called MyCope. It's minor and youth children of hoarding parents, and you can find that at www.mycohp.com. There are wiki pages on the topic for everyone to access, and then in addition, we have a chat room that's just for teenagers who are growing up in homes that have too much stuff. And traditionally, there really hasn't been an outlet for younger people. And then that builds up. The resentment is so hard. There are so many problems that can arise from that. And I just want to make it clear that the point of the group is to ease the tension and burden around family and show support. It's absolutely not adversarial. I'm trying to bring more people out to find ways that we can work on this together without kind of butting heads and becoming opposing forces in the discussions. I think it's really important. I welcome all parents who might be challenged with hoarding tendencies to visit that site as well, and you'll find some good information there. And also, if you know any teens that relate to this issue, do send them along, because peer support, it's really great. There's nothing like talking with others who get you, where you don't have to start explaining or fear the judgment that you might get from talking about it. It's a really safe place. People need that.
Thanks. And something else that we'll touch on later that a lot of you can probably relate to is sort of a message that Becca gave me, an ultimatum that if I didn't clean up, it was over. And we'll go a little further into that later. I'm sure that some of you have been on either the delivering or receiving end of a message like that. It's often a conversation fraught with anxiety, but we also want to bring some hope and helpfulness to it so that you all feel like you can get to a shared place of wellness. Thanks. Okay, our next guest today is Dr. Robin Zasio. She's from the Anxiety Treatment Center of Sacramento and Roseville, California, and the Center for Depression and Treatment Resistant Centers, Compulsive Hoarding Center, Cognitive Behavior Therapy Center. She has a radio show, the Dr. Robin Zasio Show, AM 1380 Mental Health Matters on iHeartRadio. She's the author of The Hoarder in You, How to Live a Happier, Healthier, Uncluttered Life, and a member of the International OCD Foundation and president of the OCD Sacramento Foundation. So welcome, Robin. Give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more what you do and what you hope to bring to the conversation today.
Absolutely. And I just want to say thanks to all of you for being here. We put this together at the last minute and had some technical issues, and everybody really stood firm and we made this happen. And Ethan couldn't be here today. So Lee, thanks for jumping in to get this moderated. My interest in working with people struggling with hoarding behaviors and hoarding disorder is really about a passion to help people to get their homes in order, but also to see and work on the impact that their stuff has on the family. And I think that as everybody's been talking about, hoarding is becoming more understood, but it is still so far misunderstood. And the word judgment has come up, compassion has come up, and there is so much anxiety, not only in the disorder itself, but in the family also. And so what I really strive to do is to go into the home and work with the family members, and not only help the family members better understand how they can work with their loved ones, but also helping the person struggling understand the contributors to the problem, because it's not just about cleaning up the home, right? We've said that probably every single presentation we've ever done. It's not a clean out. It's all about uncovering the dynamics that are contributing to the problem, so that we can ideally get somebody to a place where they can better be able to manage their stuff. So again, my passion is helping the community and family members themselves better understand what they can do to help and get to a place where maybe someone doesn't have to directly be working with a therapist, and that they can reach out more to support groups and the peer support. And I think that
Okay, we seem to be having a real cliffhanger here with Robin. Really fascinated to hear how the rest of that sentence goes. In the meantime, I'm just going to say that, you know, the shows that Robin has been a part of, like the Hoarders television shows, yes, they've brought a lot of attention to this challenge, and yes, it's created a lot of food for thought. So
I'm back.
I think it's great to have her here as well. So we'll let her pick up where she left off.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm having some technical issues still, so I'll just do my best. But I think what's also so important to note is what you were talking about, Becca, and the impact it's having on children and even grandchildren. And as I was looking to let the community know about this forum today. I was really blown away about the increase in Facebook pages and groups and peer support that's out there, and even grandchildren that are being affected. Of course, we know it does, but giving the recognition that this is very generational and that we have to look at all the different steps in that generation so that we can ideally try to stop that that pattern and help people to really begin to work together on this worldwide problem. So I'm so honored to be here and to answer questions, and let's get going.
Okay. You know, Robin, one question I wanted to ask you, because it comes up a lot, is motivation. And I think that, you know, in your experience in working with people that are have too much stuff, you know, what have been some indicators that you've seen that someone actually does want to help? How do you know?
You know, I always have that phrase, you have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think that that's sometimes a place that people get to. And I'm not sure why for any one of us, we have to get to a place where something is so disruptive that we finally say, okay, I'll work on it. I mean, look at how honest you guys have been in your own relationship about having to get to that place of the threat. And I think so much of why we're all here is the more that we can educate the community that there is help out there and there are steps to take, that people don't have to get to that place where it's, you know, it's basically at a crossroads. And I think also family members who can learn how to support. And I know it's hard living with someone who's struggling with these behaviors. But I think the more that family members can get on board and work together, I think that that's a really good indicator as well.
Great.
I think it's important to mention that the media did pick up on the ultimatum. She said it's me or the stuff. I think it's really important for families to take away the message that we've got to reframe the conversation. What I really was saying, and what I did say, was there's not enough room here for me. And I think by toning it down and coming from a place like that, you'll get more buy-in and be able to have more loving conversations around this than just pointing fingers and saying it's about this stuff. It's more about we're in this together, and how can we make it so all members of the family can be safe and healthy and be able to enjoy their home life.
And that's where I think, you know, mentioning the language is so important, because you know, when you are pointing the finger and putting a lot of blame, people are just putting up barriers and walls, and you can't hear anything that's being said.
No. And one more thing that comes up is we're talking about helping people with hoarding disorder. And a lot of times my phone rings and they say, what about me? I'm the family member and no one's addressing my needs. And so I'm here to really go out and speak to people and address how this does impact other members in the family so it can be understood. And I've actually had many times people with hoarding disorder say to me, wow, I never saw it that way. Now I get how it does impact others. But we're all so enclosed in kind of our own mindsets, it's hard to see the bigger picture. So when I talk about it, it's not just for family members, it's for people who struggle themselves.
Okay. Thanks. All really good points. I think you can tell that a lot of us have been thinking a lot about this. And today I'm glad we have an opportunity to share some of our different perspectives and how things have changed. You know, I don't have my bio printed. I was actually going to have Ethan. Unfortunately, Ethan couldn't be with us to facilitate today, but I'll do my best to introduce myself here. So I actually wrote down some notes because you don't get this opportunity every day. I don't know if any of you have ever been sitting on the couch and felt like sort of an armchair quarterback where you see a conversation and you're like, I really want to be a part of it. Well, today's an opportunity for me to be a part of it. And so I made some notes because I didn't want to forget some of the most important things that have been on my mind. So first of all, just to my fellow finder keepers, you're not alone. You know, I use different terms to say who I am. Sometimes I call myself Lee, sometimes an excessive finder keeper in recovery, sometimes a space invader. If you look behind us, you can see if you look behind me, you can see I am a collector of retro games, especially Atari. What I want to talk about today is sort of what a lot of us are experiencing, as if everybody's a hoarder all of a sudden, is sort of the way it's being portrayed in the media. And I wanted to break that down a little bit, if I could. So sometimes when we're experiencing something new or novel, we have to come up with a different vocabulary to express ourselves, to sort of describe what we're thinking. And I want to kind of take a look at this panic buying. I kind of consider it panic prepping, okay? Because you've sort of been familiar, maybe you've known people that have been acquiring extra food and supplies for years so that they'd be ready in case we had something like COVID-19 here. And then suddenly, a lot of us are thrust into that uncertainty and feeling like we need to rush out and get all the extra things. So you're starting to hear people described as, going out and hoarding toilet paper, hoarding sanitizer. This is not a message to people with hoarding disorder specifically. This is about people who are actively going out and stockpiling, not hoarding, but stockpiling these things. And so I just wanted to kind of point out that some of you might be feeling some extra shame because you've always felt like people look down on you for acquiring and saving. And there were a lot of personal reasons why you may have done that. But now a lot of people are experiencing some of those feelings and that anxiety. This is a huge day of what if. Everybody is wondering what if. So everybody feels like they need to take those extra measures. Now, what if you're somebody that was already distressed over this? And now you have sort of this validation that we do need to be prepared. I think that the very fact that a new task force has been developed called the Hoarding and Price Gouging Task Force to go after quote unquote bad actors who are holding on to more of the vital supplies than they personally need and or stockpiling these things to sell them at an inflated price. There's a big difference between people who have hoarding disorder and really greedy, selfish, cruel people who are collecting all these things up just to turn a profit. These are really intense times and people are getting really intense messages. Now, if you have a warehouse full of stuff and it's because you're really anxious and because maybe you do have hoarding disorder, this is our time to shine. This is our time to give back. I know a lot of you would probably give the right thing to anybody, the right person, then sell it at any price, But if that's not you, if you are, stockpiling these things to make a profit, give them up. Give them up. People need them. And this is the difference between a mental health challenge and a crime. And people don't necessarily have both, but people are suffering. So I would recommend actually changing hoarding to stockpiling in that situation. A lot of people, Robin, you had mentioned, that the generational, multi-generational aspect of this. And a lot of people talk about their parents or their grandparents living through the Great Depression and feeling like maybe that's why they started to acquire and save more than they needed. And because you'd see maybe people holding on to things that could be fixed or extra food or clothing or things just in case. And scientifically, it hasn't been proven that caused the extra acquiring and saving. But if you're vulnerable, it could certainly push you in that direction. And for those of us who are experiencing this together and feeling that anxiety, and maybe a lot of our buttons are being pushed, this is an opportunity to sort of see this as if it's already happened, to look at this as if it's our own personal Great Depression, to say, I'm feeling these things. What can I do now to mitigate the trauma? What can I do now to get myself through this so that I start practicing good behaviors and habits that I'm going to need moving forward so that these things don't overwhelm me even more? So it's sort of just looking back historically and saying we have an opportunity in real time to address the concerns that we're experiencing. And maybe if you're having some of those questions, you can ask them today. Now,
Lee, I think one of the things that is sort of interesting is that now this sense of uncertainty about whether I have enough supplies to get by without going out, I think it gives people a little bit of a sense of what it's like sometimes to have this disorder. this sense of, will I need it? Or if I don't keep it, will I need it in the future and regret letting it go or regret using it up? So I think one of the things that's happening now is people are just getting a taste of what it might feel like to have a hoarding disorder, at least on that particular topic.
Right. And I think it kind of, there's a parallel. If you've lost a loved one and you're grieving, it may look like depression, but it also is related to something very specific. So it's something that you're experiencing deeply, that you can appreciate what other people feel 24/7. If you're experiencing this now for the first time, it doesn't mean it's a feeling you'll have forever. And so, though a lot of people can, sort of associate with those feelings and emotions, don't go ahead and diagnose yourself. But do be mindful if you're starting to have these feelings and behaviors. So it's something that we can have a lot of control over. And the one last thing I want to say, because I come to this with lived experience, that's where my real education comes from, is going through this myself. But sort of getting unburied from those treasures, it wasn't something that I could do alone. I needed, something to look forward to, not just being, having change out of the distress that I'm in, but actually looking forward to something better, and working towards something more positive. And in my life, my relationship with Becca was really being impacted by the amount of stuff that I had acquired. And there wasn't enough room for both of us to be our full potential selves. And so that was something that I was working towards all this time, was helping to create a balanced environment that we could both live in and be our best true selves. And I also needed help from folks like Randy, who were creating the education that people like me could use to turn these things around. If you don't know how, what are you going to do, as bad as you want to do it? And so, I really appreciate the ongoing collaboration to bring tools like Buried in Treasures to people, to bring RAP for reducing clutter to people, to look at the hard and the soft skills. And to me, that all adds up to it, sort of this statement that it's not my fault that I struggle with hoarding disorder, but it is my responsibility to manage it. And so, if you don't know how, if you don't know what that means, you've come to the right place. Even if you don't know what to ask, maybe just in listening to other people's experiences and thoughts, you'll start to understand better yourself. So it may not be your fault, but it is our responsibility to have safety and sanctuary for everyone that we care about. We can do it. You can do it. It's been done. And every part of your life can be less cluttered inside and outside. So that's where we're at. And so what we're going to do is really turn this over to all of you that are at home, viewing this from the comfort of your home. Hopefully it's comfortable. If not, it can be. And hopefully it will be. This is a heck of a time to be struggling with this personally, isn't it? It really is. What I'm going to do is take a look at the chat box here and take a look and see some of the questions and comments that are coming up, and see if we can address these. And it's cool seeing a lot of familiar names out there too. That's nice. I'm glad you could all be with us. This first one came in at 1:21 p.m. I'm going to give a timestamp so that the person who's helping us out can get it up on the screen so you can all read it. This one came from Darcy. I live with my mother and she is a hoarder. Now I'm going to use the words that you use, but I'm also going to be reminding people the caveat of person with hoarding disorder. If you refer to yourself as a hoarder, that's okay. We don't have a concern about that, but this is a time to actually kind of be aware and mindful and think about how we use the words. So maybe that's something that people start practicing today. It's not your fault, and you're not a bad person if it's just the only word you've ever known and used. It's cool. But this is the time to start thinking about it differently. But I'm going to use your language because your language is really important here. So Darcy says, I live with my mother and she's a hoarder. We could use help, especially during these times. So I'm going to put it out there, and I don't see a way for the speakers to raise their hand, but if you want to actually physically, you could raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you. If you feel like you want to contribute, we'll start with you. Okay, Randy.
I'll just say a few things about this. It really, to give advice, we probably need a little bit more information, but the very basic recommendation would be to see if you can find someone who's able to help your mother. And the best place to go is the International OCD Foundation website, which has a help finder. You can find therapists who specialize in treating hoarding disorder on the website. And hopefully you can find someone within a particular amount of time. Now that assumes that your mother, Darcy, would be willing to see a therapist or recognizes that this is a problem for her, or says or conveys to you that she thinks it's a problem. Now, one of the things that we see sometimes is difficulties within a family system for people to be able to communicate their concerns about a clutter issue. And so sometimes it looks like the person with the problem doesn't have any insight, doesn't recognize this is a problem. A lot of times this really is a kind of form of defensive activity where they are somehow feeling stigmatized, feeling shame, feeling all kinds of things about this behavior and feeling out of control. And in order to protect their sense of self and keep themselves from feeling too badly about themselves, they'll defend it against it by denying it's a problem or by minimizing the problem because it helps them feel a little better. And if that's the case, it's not really a problem not being able to recognize it, but really a problem of trying to make themselves feel better in the context of this environment. And so it requires a different way of breaking through. What we recommend for people in families is to be able to carry on a conversation about the state of the house, one that is absent emotion, because what we find over the years in family systems is there's a lot of conflict that develops over this. And family members understandably want to help their loved ones, especially if it's an elderly person who does this, and they get sort of insistent and sometimes demanding of the person to try to clean things up. And that often backfires. And so the first thing we try to do is to get people to be able to carry on a conversation without emotion and to start trying to take the perspective of their loved one, trying to see through their eyes what they see in these possessions, because that empathy really is what it is the beginning step in being able to understand where they're coming from and being able to help them as a result of it.
I think that's really important. And I think it's also sort of that, it goes both ways, because I'm hoping that even if someone feels like other people don't get them or their attachments to their things, that I'll say we as a peer, that from our perspective, we can start to sort of put ourselves in other people's shoes too. Even if we don't understand them, they don't understand us, just recognizing objectively how the state of the home is impacting other people. Like, we'll get to the deeper, sometimes beautiful meanings of things. But for now, we're going to try to see each other's, priorities and what that means.
And I would just kind of everything that you guys said, you said it beautifully. And I think the importance of having that conversation without all the emotion, and, maybe even doing, again, it's a much bigger conversation, but kind of what we call values clarification, whereby, what type of relationship do you want to have with your mother? What are your mother's values? Where does she want to go with all this? And having the loving conversation about how you care about your mother and you just want the best for her. Because I think, the conversations usually start out with so much frustration that they just, plummet so quickly, and then people are walking off being angry. But starting to be able to have a good, healthy conversation where there's active listening. People are not talking over one another. And again, I think values clarification is really huge to kind of give you a goal in which, why are we going to do this? How are we going to tackle this? And I'm wondering, Darcy, if you've asked your mom, how can I help you, Mom? Because oftentimes there's so much pointing of the finger of, you need to get this cleaned up. You need to get this in order, rather than what can I do to help you?
I think another helpful feature is, we've all seen the word hoarder used. It's ubiquitous. And I think it's really important when you're working on your relationships with a family member who has too much stuff, is throw that word in the garbage, because it is a word that's loaded. It's traditionally been used to insult. It's been really wielded to hurt people. And if you're in a family and you're pointing the finger and you're calling someone a hoarder, what's the impulse there? They're going to want to back up and make you leave the house right away. So I think it's really important that we think of hoarding as a behavior, not as a person. And I think that can really cause a big shift in how communications can take off from that foundation level. And that's where I'm thinking of. From the most basic level, when you're approaching these conversations, if you call someone a hoarder, it's not off to a good start, unless the person themselves uses that word to refer. But otherwise, it is harmful, and it immediately, you lose so much ground when you start there.
And in a sense, it's a form of disrespect that is perceived as disrespect, even though it may not be intended that way, but it's perceived as being disrespectful.
Sometimes it's intended, and sometimes it's not intended. And when our end goal is to make things better, we have to err on the side of caution with that. Yeah. And also getting really practical, Darcy, about what kind of help do you need? Like, for example, in our life, I could say to Lee, I can't get to the washing machine. Bring it down to those real practical instances that are causing disruption in the household. Things that really can be acted upon to make change. And in small measures at first, I wouldn't walk in and say, the whole house needs to be fixed. I would think, what are the key things that would be helpful to making it safe for family members and for your mom? Because we know there are lots of falling and tripping hazards when there's a lot of stuff in the house, respiratory problems. So you can use those kind of reasons to start the discussion from, caring.
Yeah, I think also one of the things that is useful here in thinking about this is to understand that each of the possessions someone has meaning for them. And that meaning often has to do with their sense of self. And one of the things that would be useful if you have not had conversations about these things with your mom, Darcy, one of the things that might be useful is to look at this as a way of understanding your mother and who she is, by asking her to tell you the story of the possession. What is this possession? When did you get it? Why did you get it? What emotion is wrapped up in it, and so forth. So you really get to learn something about your mother and her history through her explanation of this item, and you can really see that with people with this problem. When they begin describing something, you really get to see who the person is and what their life is like. And during that conversation, what I found is often people will use that conversation as a backdrop to look at their values. That Robin was talking a minute ago about values clarification. If this item now doesn't quite match with where they're at now with their values, it sort of begins to change their perspective a little bit on how important this item is for me now in this point in my life.
Thanks. So I wanted to just remark on something that is kind of coming up, because a lot of this is about how to help your loved one who has hoarding disorder. I'm saying to the folks that are struggling with the collections themselves, don't forget to ask your loved ones what their possessions mean to them. So you'll get a chance to share who you are and not have your identity lost in just trying to help somebody else. And that also is a way to, kind of extend that backdrop and say, this is who I am. This is what my identity and priorities are. And it will be awesome to be doing some of these things that make my life feel full. That's great for you and this would be great for me. Maybe we can figure out a way that we can both have the space we need while we figure these things out.
And I think it's important for family members who are trying to help their people, their loved ones who have too much stuff. It's really important to find ways to get your needs met that don't rely upon the person trying to make you feel better who has too much stuff. Get help for yourself. Find a place to vent that's safe, and don't get stuck in the venting. I definitely understand the temptation there. There's a lot of hard feelings that are pent up. And so it's really important for you to get help yourself while you're helping your mom or the others that you care about. You don't want to be left out of the equation, and you should not be.
Thanks, everybody. So I'm going to move on to another topic here, and that's about underlying trauma. And I'm not even sure where it is in the string, but there was a comment that a lot of people experience underlying trauma. And that is absolutely the case. And I think that it's a really important sort of factor to consider when we're having those conversations that seem to be objectively based about these are my needs, what are your needs. This is really deep psychological stuff, and it's not necessarily practical. The answers don't necessarily even make sense when I try to explain them. That sometimes these are things I haven't even figured out for myself. Why do I need to keep this or that? And why does it need to be where it is? It's not even what's in the box, but where the box is placed that's important. To consider that sometimes people are saving things because parts of them are afraid that they'll actually forget things that other parts know. What I'm trying to say is that it's not always apparent why people have things. The underlying trauma, the struggles they've had, maybe this is a way that they're trying to keep themselves safe, and they either don't even realize that that's why they're doing it. But when we are talking as peers and family members and we can figure these things out, we can come up with some different approaches to feel safe that may actually be more safe. For example, the box in front of the door, someone might not really put two and two together. Why do I keep all my stuff in the back hallway? Well, maybe there was a break-in one time, and that's a great way to stay safe, is to barricade yourself in. But the trouble with that is help can't get in either, and you can't get out if you need help. So understanding why those things are where they are and other ways that we can sort of feel safe in our homes without creating new hazards. So want to kind of touch on that there is, trauma here often, not always, more often than not. And here are some of your impressions on how that plays out, how you've seen people come to make that realization, and what's maybe been helpful in moving forward as they experience that. That's big stuff.
I think the only thing I'd like to add on to that one, Lee, is that there's such a natural inclination to avoid doing things that are difficult, whether it be dealing with your issues or your trauma. And I think it's so important to remember that if you continue to avoid dealing with the things that are perpetuating the hoarding behaviors, it's just going to keep getting worse. It's not going to get better. And dealing with those underlying issues is the key to having success. Again, reinforcing that it's not about cleaning up. Because I know people are always looking for strategies, and strategies are important at some part in the phase. But the first step is not just diving in and starting to just let go of stuff, because as that anxiety comes up and the difficulty tolerating it, there's going to be more avoidance. And I think also, just going back to Darcy's question, just to remember there are a lot of really good books out there that talk about family members and how they can cope when they're living with someone who's struggling with these behaviors.
Okay. Anybody else like to chime in?
So I just might add that we know that that about half of people who suffer from hoarding disorder have had some kind of serious trauma. So it is a large percentage of people with hoarding disorder who've experienced trauma, not always in childhood, but at some point in their life. And so that appears to translate into these attachments to possession that have to do with safety and feeling comfortable. Now, for all of us, we have what psychologists sometimes call safety signals in our lives. That is, things we are used to, the furniture in our home, the picture on the wall, whatever it is. When we come home after a long day, we just feel comfortable around in these situations. These are signals of safety. And for people who feel vulnerable, it may be that somehow all this stuff, the things that are piled in the middle of the room may come to form signals of safety, so that letting go of any one of them makes you feel vulnerable, even though you're not. And I think it goes to one of the key characteristics of working through this problem. It's hard really to know the meaning of a possession that you have, especially if you have lots of them in a sort of cluttered environment. It's hard to know the meaning of that possession until you think about the possibility of doing without it. And that's a good way to start exploring for yourself. What is the nature of my attachment to this? Why do I have this? And if I think about throwing it away, what do I feel? And what does that feeling mean? And where does that feeling come from? That's all a part of the process of learning how to change your relationship with your possessions.
And just to add one more thing to what you're saying, Randy, is I think also there's so much avoidance because of the fear of what they're going to feel.
Yeah.
And this idea that it's never going to go away.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important that the feelings will dissipate. And I've worked with more people than not who actually feel better when they get rid of the stuff and they start dealing with the issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that that's such an important point to make, and that is, you're going to be feeling something in the moment. There's no question about it. If you didn't, then it obviously wouldn't be hard. But to know that those feelings will not stay there. This idea, Lee, that you mentioned earlier, that if I let go of this item, the memory is going to go with it. Well, memories are per se stuck in the item as they're stuck in our hearts and our minds and that sort of thing. And that's just one idea I think that people get stuck on. And so they don't want to test it out because they have that fear of the fear.
Right. Yeah. And I think, when it comes to what we're experiencing now, this is sort of a shared trauma that we're all experiencing something in real time that is having an impact on us, whether we feel it consciously or not. It is changing the way we think about things. And when I say things, I mean literally physical things. I've been looking at my own collections lately, thinking about what really matters and seeing myself in this sort of snapshot in time where at this point in my life, I come this far in my recovery. I had figured out what's important to me and what's not, but just our connections to the things around us. Maybe the pillow that you were leaning on when you watched the news, and it felt comfortable. Maybe that pillow is going to be difficult to let go of sometime. Maybe the phone that you use to connect with family members is going to be difficult to let go of sometime. These things will take on perhaps new meaning, and to sort of recognize what's happening in terms of what these things mean to us. Do they bring us comfort? Can we do things differently? And it's almost like we can test these theories out in real time. I'm saying that again because the stuff is happening. It really is. And so when we look at our environment and consider maybe the new connections and meanings that things are taking on, we can think about the long-term sort of implications of that and how else we can feel safe and comfortable. A lot of people are probably looking around and seeing things that were given to them by loved ones, things that are really meaningful. And maybe you're feeling comfort when you look at those things, when you hold those things, maybe when you cook a recipe that you learned growing up, maybe when you hear a song or play a song, it provides you comfort. Just to be thinking about what are your wellness tools that are going to help you move forward with less clutter, and which of those might actually end up contributing more to it because you're in a vulnerable place.
Just want to look at the further questions. One thing I'll say while Lee is having a look at the chat box right now is we are under duress, all of us being stuck in our homes. So any thoughts of making big changes or working on this are really hard, especially now. And I want people to be able to take a breath and know that we're not really going to be able to work on things right now. Right now, we have to find comfort and find some kind of peace that we're going to get through this time, and then things can be worked on. But I don't expect anyone to be making great changes in their home right now. That makes it a little trickier.
Yeah, Beck, it's interesting. I wonder whether, and I don't know this for sure, but I have heard from a couple of people something like this, that being at home all the time during this crisis has helped them change their perspective a little bit on what's important. And especially in looking at objects in the home, possessions in the home, how do they fit now? If you're in the middle of a crisis, do they seem as important? And when this ends, will they be as important? And I think it may be an opportunity for some people to look and maybe start thinking a little bit differently about the possessions that they have.
Absolutely. Good point.
Yeah, and it's also a really good time to take care of the possessions you have. You know, it's funny, like I'm a collector, and I noticed that I often in the past would look online at eBay or something and look for something cool, and it was like my escape. Now I look at it and I don't really care. It's interesting. I actually have no real interest in looking at new acquisitions, but what I'm really enjoying is taking care of what I do have and curating my collection. So I'm sort of in this bubble where I'm not bringing in new things other than the necessities. So it's also a chance for those of you who collect things that are meaningful to really take care of them. How are you going to display them? How are you going to take care of them going forward? And are there things that you can let go so you have room for things that mean even more to you? There's a question that has come up, and it's come up in a couple of different forms. Jeff Szymanski from the IOCDF asked at 1:08 p.m., does anyone know of any virtual support groups for HD? Is anyone doing a Buried in Treasures group virtually? We've had some requests. And that's also, people have been asking where they can find peer support online. So the Buried in Treasures workshop, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is based on the book that Randy wrote with Gail Steckity and David Tolan, Buried in Treasures. Randy and I developed a facilitator guide for it. And it's a self-help and empowerment group for people working on reducing their clutter. So 16 sessions over 16 weeks. And a lot of people, including ourselves, were gearing up to offer an in-person group, and now that can't happen. So there's the question of, are those groups being offered? There was a question from someone else asking if they had any tips for facilitating those groups differently and how to find out about them. So I guess one of the things I can say is that there are definitely BIT groups being offered virtually right now. You know, checking in on our website, mutual support, mutual-support.com might be a way to connect with us so we can connect you with other people that are running them. We're about to be running them ourselves, but there are people out there that are offering them currently. And so you might check in with the Institute for Challenging Disorganization. There are some professional organizers running them. Look in your chat rooms. There's a group called the Clutter Movement on Facebook. Now, the Clutter Movement has 3 separate private groups, one for peers, one for family, and one for providers. So that's a great place to put your question and get your request out there. Someone will see it and hopefully get in touch with you to invite you to it. You know, one of the things that concerns me with an online group or any kind of conference call is always the number of people you have involved. It's a little bit harder to negotiate. So from a practical standpoint, you might consider having a slightly smaller group instead of like 6 to 10, maybe have 4 to 6 people logging in, so that especially if you're new to it, you can get used to the technology, as we will be. This is a time when people are broadcasting the help from home. So it's something that we've wanted to do for a long time, and it's go time. You know, this has got to happen now. So we'll see you there too. But it is happening, and that's something we're really grateful to hear about. What are some other places for those of you who are out there that you're hearing about peer support opportunities, groups, things like that?
Something that I just want to throw out, you know, so much of the therapy now has gone virtual. or the telehealth. And so we have an intensive outpatient program, and we do have some patients who are still coming in, and of course many that are not coming in. And I think a lot of people don't realize that insurance companies do pay for intensive outpatient. Many insurance companies do pay for intensive outpatient, which can be anywhere from 3, 4, or 5 hours a day. And we're right in their homes with them now. They're picking up the stuff, they're talking to us, and it's really been an interesting shift and a good shift in so many ways, because oftentimes people, when they come into our facility, they're bringing the stuff, and once they're ready to start going through it. But being virtual now, we're seeing the home. It's not just pictures now. So if you don't have anything in your area, you might want to look into what provisions your insurance company does have for an intensive outpatient program. It can be anywhere from 3, 4, or 5 times a week, and we can work with the family that way too.
And sometimes I hear trepidation, with the telemedicine that's going on. People don't want to share the background view of their homes. And I want you to know you don't have to do that either. You can have the camera off, because that can be really intimidating for some people. So it's okay to assert yourself and say, I'd rather not have the camera on.
Mm-hmm.
I see in the comments that IOCDF has a list of teletherapy providers if you look at their website. And find some of them who will treat hoarding disorder.
Yeah, and one thing that I'd like to, hopefully we'll see that added to the searchable database is peer support. Because for people that don't have a license, or they're not clinicians, it's hard to get yourself out there sometimes. So hopefully we'll have that added to the database. But this is something that's relatively new. Something that we're all kind of growing and developing together, so that we can connect all the dots and help people find people. The idea of being able to sort of connect with other people from home is actually really, really helpful, because a lot of people out there don't have access to get to an in-person meeting. So hopefully we can take the best of the tools that are being developed now and carry them back into the world after this health threat has passed, so that people who haven't had access to groups will still have access to groups, especially in rural areas where they're not going to be able to make it. And even when we run a group in a small city, people can't make it because the buses don't run late enough, or it's not on their route. So this is all about accessibility. There's a group, Clutters Anonymous. They also do a lot of phone support and virtual support. So I think that what we're seeing in this conversation is that there are options for everyone, whether you want really, straight up clinical help delivered by maybe a licensed clinician, or you want peer support delivered in a CLA group or buried in treasures. The help is out there. So I'm really grateful everybody is kind of bringing their tools to the table so that people have options. So it's good to explore and reach out.
And additionally, I think it's important to note that, there are a lot of people who have lost their jobs, who are struggling with hoarding behaviors. And so finances might be significantly tight. And with the telehealth, there are many, many services now where they're actually waiving people's co-pays, and a lot of people don't realize that. So that's something else for people to consider when accessing your insurance, because there may be more resources there than people realize.
Okay. So one of the questions here from Colleen that came in at 1:53 p.m. Why do my saved items turn into disorder instead of being ordered? This seems to be a part of the issue as well. Absolutely. So as Randy was saying in the DSM, one of the markers for hoarding disorder is that the things are out of order, that they're taking up space in the house so that you can't use those areas. There's also something called chronic disorganization, which means it may not be an actual emotional attachment to the items, but rather a seemingly impossible task of being able to keep things organized. So there are a couple of different reasons why they might be getting disorganized, but maybe if folks here want to contribute a couple, tips on staying organized and how you do that.
I wanted to ask Randy in particular, do you think that the disorganization comes from a certain aspect of the brain functioning?
Yeah, what we know when we think about what underlies hoarding behavior, there are a couple of things. One is we know it's partly genetic. There are other vulnerabilities as well, but one of the second things that we think of as underlying are information processing deficits. And these are largely, in all likelihood, issues of the way in which the brain is structured, the brain is wired. And they include a number of different things like attentional focus, perception, and one of them, and categorization, ability to categorize things. And they all center around this ability to organize things. And so we think that that's in large part that portion of the problem that Colleen is talking about, the inability to sort and figure out how to organize things is an information processing deficit. And my guess is, and we don't have all the evidence yet, but my guess is that this is where the genetic component comes in. Not so much in the attachment to possessions, but in the inability to keep them organized and these other information processing deficits that involve organization, but also lead us to an inability or a difficulty with making decisions. And these, we think what's going on in some ways, the brains of people with hoarding disorder may be more complex, and in some ways they may be smarter than the rest of us, in that the associations that can be made with the brain are just so much more plentiful. But with that more complex brain wiring comes a sort of an inability to keep track of all the details. One of the people we interviewed in the book Stuff described it as his brain's a tree with too many branches. There's just too much information for him to be able to sort it out and distinguish what's an important piece of information when it's a less important piece of information. So in some ways, in part, it's one of the reasons why sometimes I describe hoarding disorder as a disorder of giftedness, that there are certain ways in which people with this problem are gifted, and intelligence is one of them. And it in part, it's tied up with the brain's ability to absorb information and hold information. And the difficulty is really how you take that information and manipulate it into something more practical.
Thank you. I think it's really important to think about that piece of it, because sometimes this gets described like it's a personality problem. And I think we really need to recognize that it's not.
Yep. I definitely. Oh yeah.
It goes back to that judgment again that you're referring to, and we've been mentioning a few different times, that it's really interesting that conversations with people who suffer from severe depression look very different than conversations with people who have hoarding disorder. And obviously they're two very different conditions, but the tones that are being used and the way that people communicate, I think that we have to remember that we are talking about this is mental health. It's a mental disorder. And it's so important that it's treated and looked at like that, instead of judging someone as a person. And, all the accusations that get made about you don't care about me and you don't love me. And if you did, then you wouldn't be doing this to us. And you don't respect yourself, and all of that. We just have to throw that out the window. And again, I think that that's why it's so important that family is a part of the treatment, so that we're working together to treat the system.
Yeah, I personally, people have thought, made the assumption that people who have clutter and too much stuff don't mind it being that way. I can't stand clutter. I can't. I love order. I love being organized, and I actually really enjoy getting organized. And something that's been helpful for me is actually saying my process out loud as I go through it. For example, I was going through, I had a bin of cables, electrical cables, musical cables, and what I was going to do is just divide them up and figuring out what I could still use and what I would let go and stuff. And so I had one bin that was just going to be guitar cables, generically, because I play electric violin, but all these instruments use what I'll generically call guitar cables. And so I had one bin, and I was just putting all the guitar cables in. But then I was like, wait, this one is used, so I'll put it here. This one, I'm not sure if it works, so I'll put it over here. Then this one, it's still in the package, so maybe I could resell it. So I'll put it over here. And this one over here, I'm actually using it right now, so I'll put it over here. You see what happens is I thought I had one category, and suddenly I'm looking at 5 or 6. So what I did at that point, because I was more aware of what I was doing, because I was saying it out loud to myself, I put them all back in the guitar cable category. And I said, when I'm done with all of these different really quite kind of general but specific enough categories, I'll go back and make those decisions, but I'm never going to get through this if I try to divide things by every single little feature that differentiates them. Because like Randy was saying, some of us with this, and some of us who don't have this challenge, see really subtle differences in different items and different objects. But think about it this way. Turn your home into a silverware drawer. Think about that for a second. People say they don't know how to organize and they don't have systems. 9 times out of 10, people do have a silverware drawer. Think about when those dirty dishes come out and you go to put them away. Big fork, big spoon, little spoon, steak knife, butter knife. Bing, 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 bing. You can put away 30 items very quickly when you know where they go. How many of you would feel kind of uncomfortable putting the big fork in the little fork slot? Even that little bit of a difference feels wrong or something because you've practiced this sort of system long enough so you know where to get something and you know where to put it back. Not only that, if you told someone where to find it, they could find it. And so when you think about if you feel really disorganized and that you don't have any systems and you have no idea how to do it, look for something in your home that you do have a system for. Maybe it's where you put your car keys when you come home. Maybe it's where you put your bus pass. Maybe it's where you put your headphones. Maybe it's where you put your laptop down. But think about the things that are working and try to find other sort of categories that'll work for as well. So likely that you're doing things right already. You just got to take your own best advice if you can find it. So let's see. One of the things that's really cool is seeing where people are joining us from. There are people
all over the world.
All over the world. The comments are streaming in. Thank you all for tuning in from wherever you are. I know it's very late, very early, depending where you are. Let's see. Okay, so at 2 o'clock, Julia wrote, "I cannot stop collecting things. It is definitely ruining my quality of life. Each time I throw some things, I end up collecting after that. Please help. I'm from Singapore." Okay. So I have some thoughts, but I want to put it out there to y'all. What do you think?
Well, let me just throw a couple of things out and the way in which we approach this in treatment. One of the things that often happens when people acquire excessively is that when they are out somewhere and see something that they want to purchase or pick up, what happens is the focus of attention narrows so that they're thinking only about this item and how wonderful this item will be to have. And they're not thinking about the fact that they don't have room for it. They may not have money for it. They may already have one or more of these items. It's as though that information is inaccessible to them in their current attentional state. And so one of the things that we do in treatment, we do it in the Buried Treasures workshop as well, is we have people generate a list of questions they think they should ask themselves before they acquire something. And that most questions are the sort of questions that everyone would ask. Do I have money for it? Do I have room for it? Do I already have something? Will not getting it help me work on this problem? So forth, questions like that. And then we ask them to carry that list of questions with them. And whenever they have to make a decision about acquiring something, to go through those questions. And it seems to make a difference. It brings the context of their life back into the decision-making process. So that's one very simple thing to try. The other thing we do in treatment is to look at this as really an uncontrollable urge. And what do we do to try to help people get control over that urge? We basically create a learning program, a way for them to learn how to tolerate the urge to acquire. And we do it in much the same way we construct an exposure hierarchy in OCD. We construct a hierarchy of situations where there is a slight urge to acquire something all the way up to a situation where there's an uncontrollable urge. And then we have people work through that hierarchy, exposing themselves to that situation and tolerating the urge without acquiring the object. And in time, they learn how to tolerate that urge without acquiring something. So those are two basic things that we do in treatment to start addressing this acquisition problem.
I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, in that people are so afraid of how they're going to feel if they don't get that item in that moment. Am I going to regret it? Am I not going to be able to stop thinking about it? And it's really difficult to then resist, as you're saying, Randy, because you don't want to experience that. And I think doing a little test run, as you're suggesting, to say, okay, I'm going to go find something, or while I'm out in the store or whatever, and test this theory out that I am just going to feel so anxious and so remorseful, I think is an important one. We do that at the conference every year, and it's highly successful. People just learn so much from the non-acquisition acquiring outings that we do. And of course, Lee and Becca, you've been on those. I also think that it's really important to set rules for yourself, that if you're going to be going shopping online, that you should have somebody next to you to kind of hold you accountable. Or if you know that you're going into a store that is going to be particularly tempting for you, take somebody with you and have that list, as you're mentioning, Randy, and go through that list, because it's all about anxiety. It's all about fear, and really being able to test it out, I think, is so significant, because people will find that, what they're feeling in the moment will eventually dissipate.
I think another thing that I've actually used, I haven't struggled with the attachment piece that's so necessary to be considered in hoarding disorder, but I certainly have struggled with compulsive shopping in my life. And one way I got through that is thinking of harm reduction. What's the next best thing I can do to achieve some kind of feeling of satisfaction that I might get from shopping without adding the burden to my finances and my home? And something that I found is a way to reframe it, like, what can I do? So I went through catalogs and I cut out all the things that I wanted to buy without making that next leap to call or to order in that way or to go to the store. And believe it or not, I did gain a buzz just in doing that and allowing myself to do that. And I think harm reduction is a real key. Like, what can I do to get a feeling that will satisfy me in the moment, but not engage me in that harmful behavior?
Yeah, and something, I think someday I'll publish a coffee table book called What I Didn't Bring Home.
Mm-hmm.
I love to take pictures of treasures that I find, and I'll often send a copy of it to somebody that I think will appreciate it and be like, check out the thing I found. That has become my new victory more often than not, is to find something and leave it where I found it, to be a finder leaver instead of a finder keeper, because so much of the exhilaration comes from sort of our orientation to that score. And if my new high comes from the triumph sometimes of leaving something behind, I can leave a store feeling good and feel good the next day. Because oftentimes I would find something incredible, acquire it, and by the time I even got to my vehicle, I felt bad. So thinking that through is really helpful. A lot of people carry a few power questions. There's really one for me that I ask at the end of the day. I said, what would Becca think if I brought this home? And that can be kind of a reality check for me. And sometimes I think she might be cool with it. And then sometimes I'll ask, and sometimes she is. Now, we're sitting in my office. This is my identity that we're surrounded by, not hers. And so, that is a really big deal too. When we're thinking about what we're bringing in, is it for me or is it for us? Is it for the kids or is it for the pets? Who is it for? And who might it be causing a problem for? So there are the sort of pros and cons to any kind of acquisition, as well as what we're holding on to and letting go. Now,
I'd say one other thing about acquisition problems. Oftentimes people will control the acquisition to some extent by avoiding places where they might pick something up. And that does help in at least initially in being able to control this. But unfortunately, in the long run, that's a difficult strategy for dealing with this, because in our culture, it's hard to ignore the cues to buy something, the cues to acquire something. And so sometimes we use it early in treatment to give people some degree of control over their buying behavior, their acquiring behavior. But in the end, we don't want people to rely on that kind of a strategy very strongly, because it's too hard to do in this society.
Yeah, you can't avoid forever. And what it ends up doing is limiting your life. I mean, the way I like to kind of think of it is, let's say your favorite band is coming to town, but you're trying to stay sober, and they're going to be playing at a bar, and you feel like, I want to go, but I can't because I'm going to sort of relapse. I'm going to drink, and I can't. And you think, well, maybe by this time next year, I'll have the skills to be able to go and enjoy my band no matter where they play. So I like to kind of think of it as putting my armor on when I have these skills and confidence that I can go out in the wilderness of acquisition triggers and come out unscathed, that I can enjoy the things that make me happy without negative consequences. That's a win. So like you're saying, Randy, the avoidance isn't recovery. It may be a good first step when you're just getting your tools honed. But ultimately, to be able to roam freely and feel like when you do encounter something that's tough to leave behind, that you'll be able to make the right choice. And sometimes the right choice will be to acquire it. Sometimes the right choice will be to not let something go. Sometimes the right choice will be to not work on organizing. We really do need to compartmentalize these different challenges, because otherwise you're always working on it. You're always maybe feeling like you're punishing yourself, and there's a time and a place for everything. So if you have let a lot of excess things go and you know you have the space, it's sweet when you can say, yeah, I can get this. It checks all the boxes. When you can say, you know what, today I'm going to work on my organizing for 15 minutes. You can totally put your feet up at the end of the 15 minutes and be done for now. And so I think it's really important, as we were saying earlier, you're stuck with your stuff right now. Being able to stop is going to be just as important as being able to start when you're working on these things, and taking care of yourself at the same time. You know, I don't know about any of you, but when I'm going through, if I come to a National Geographic magazine, I'm like, am I going to keep this one? I'll just flip through. Suddenly, like some article about a tropical rainforest frog is the most remarkable thing I've ever seen, and I can't do anything except read it. And what I'm doing now is I'm saying, you know what, when I come to something like that, I'm going to set it aside. And when my 15 minutes is up, I can kick back and read it and enjoy it. So a lot of people say that they're not sure how to reward themselves because they always think of it as getting something new. Maybe think of it as enjoying something old, and that this is an opportunity to sort of experience that for the first time. Do some home shopping. You don't have to go out. You don't have to click purchase to really acquire novel experiences and things you already had.
I think too, this concept of rewarding yourself. I hear from so many people when they say, I don't deserve to be rewarded. You know, my house is not in order. It's impacting my family and I'm working on it. But I don't feel like I deserve to be rewarded. I need to be spending every single minute trying to deal with this. And I think that this is really where that self-compassion comes in again, and giving yourself a break and being proud of yourself that you are working on it, because it is very difficult work. And knowing who you are and how you work. Because, you know, trying to organize your house in a week, depending on the severity level, is probably not going to be the best plan, because you're going to burn. So really knowing who you are, maybe working 2 hours on it every other day, maybe getting a clutter buddy who can come in and help you. And in turn, you can go to their house and help them. There's so many different strategies that people can use. But I am all for the reward. And again, not necessarily something that is monetarily purchased, but, you know, giving yourself permission to, you know, just go out and lay in the sun, like, you know, and not feeling guilty because you're laying in the sun and taking time to yourself when, you know, you have this feeling like you've got to be working on your stuff.
Right. So we're actually coming up on the end of our town hall here, remarkably. The time has flown by. I just wanted to read a few of the comments that are coming in here because there's obviously been more than we could acknowledge all at once, but thank you all so much for tuning in and sharing. The conversation is just starting, and now I hope that you feel like there are a lot of people that want to be a part of it, and we can find ways to remain connected. For those of you who don't have access to a Buried in Treasures group right now, or maybe never have, we post the facilitator guide for free on our website. And so we're happy to email you that so that you can start to learn yourself, maybe start to learn about other people, and gain some new insights. One of the title of this town hall is Living with HD in the Time of COVID, right? Now, we haven't really discussed how that's changing things up, but, to add that layer on top of what you're already experiencing, just want to sort of reflect on for those who were saying like, but how do I get things out of the house? I'm up to that point. What do I do? Be thinking that this is a preparation for what comes next. I'm basically putting things in a donate box and in a sell box, and those things are being put together. And so that you're ready the day when you can go out and safely donate again or trade or whatever it is, that you're ready. But starting with a harm reduction approach, not necessarily trying to make everything better all at once and doing a little in a lot of places. Really hone in and focus on what's most important to your health and safety and those you may live with. I kind of think the path to recovery is 3 feet wide. If you know about sort of the harm reduction theory, it's that you don't necessarily have to let anything go. It's where things are being kept that is the concern. Now, if you have things that are outdated, maybe some food, maybe some dirt, some things that need to be cleaned up, those do have to be addressed. But more often than not, the things that get under our feet, so we step on them in the dark and trip, things like that, if you go through your home and look for those safety things, we would recommend starting there. And also think about what contributes to your quality of life. What would be nice to have is a clear space where, maybe the kids are doing online school. Where can they sit and have the laptop flipped open so that they're comfortable for their education? Where can you be together to have your meal together? What's important? So to be thinking about those things. Just wanted to kind of send it around to see if you all had sort of a couple of final words here to share before we wrap up.
There's one question that came in that I thought might be worth talking about in wrapping up, and that is, where's the research going? I think it came in at 2:15. What research is going on? And what we see around the world now is a lot of research on the etiology, that is the background of OCD, a lot of research on what's happening in the brain, some research, although it's been slow in coming, looking at medications, a lot of research on the nature of attachments to possessions. A lot of stuff coming out of Australia on the nature of attachments. With respect to treatment, there are a bunch of studies looking at what we can do to beef up the cognitive behavior therapy that we've got. There is a program in San Diego looking at beefing up cognitive rehabilitation. That is the organization, the decision-making, the information processing deficits I was talking about a moment ago. So that's one. Another one, going back to what Robin was talking about, reward systems. There is one study suggesting that pairing cognitive behavior therapy with contingency management, that is structuring a reward system for different behaviors, may increase the effectiveness of the treatment. And then there's some really interesting stuff in the development of what's called compassion-focused therapy, used in other areas, particularly in substance abuse areas. Compassion-focused therapy, where the focus is on being gentle with yourself in trying to change. And those are all, I think, really important areas where we're headed in terms of the research on this.
Thanks, Randy. Robin? Thoughts as we wrap?
Yeah, the only thing that I would say is, if people can take advantage of this time, if you're ready to start moving forward, if you've been holding it on with the shelter in place and not going out and acquiring, then that really shows that maybe you can do a little bit more than maybe you realized. And I think this presentation was chock full of tips and ideas and resources, and know that you're not alone. This thread of live comments that we're getting is just amazing, and it's so awesome to see how many people have joined us. And I think all of us would like to see this conversation continued. And as long as we're tied down, I think it would be great to continue these town halls so we can give people an opportunity to ask the questions that they might not otherwise have access to some experts to get some info.
Thanks. And Becca, I'll give you the last word here. What do you think?
I want people to know that you're not alone. And oftentimes people will say to me, people don't care, you know, they just don't really care. And I want you to know, whether you're a person working on this yourself or a family member, I meet people all the time who very much care, who very much want to change and make things better. And it's really hard for them to find places that help. But what we're trying to do is get that help out there. And ultimately, I want to see people getting help a lot sooner before things get too heavy for them. But
and the International OCD Foundation is a great resource. Check out their website.
Definitely do. Okay, well, thanks, everybody. That's the time we have today. Thanks for joining us. Like Randy was saying, the iocdf.org. And we'll also post the links that we've been talking about today, and try to maybe look back and answer some of these questions and get some of that information there for you as well. But yeah, hope to see you all again. And
All right.
thank you all.
thank you. Stay
Thank
safe.
you all.
All right.